This is an A-line skirt made with a printed cotton viscose fabric. It's very light and I just love how it feels. I started by making the pattern for it, of which I thought I might have one in my size, but I didn't. Apparently, I've never made an A-line skirt before for myself. I have made a tutorial on drafting one, which I'll link below, but it was in a different size. I could have graded it, but I thought I'd just make one. So I dug into my patterns and found the graded skirt and decided to use the size 16. I have a tutorial on how to draft a straight skirt in the description as well. In order to trace out the pattern without destroying my desk, I used this red board which I cut from a file holder. I bought it a long time ago, but it got spoiled, so yeah, now this is how I use it. It's a bit soft and I find it works well since I don't have a self-healing mat. After tracing out the back and the front, I measured the hips and the waist to make sure it was the right measurement. The waist was a bit smaller by a quarter inch, which I added to the front, but it really wasn't necessary for me to do so because after I stitched it, it fit well, but I felt I should take in the waist a bit. And I always have this problem where I'm paranoid the waist might be too small, but I always end up tightening it after like stitching and all. I think from now on I'll be making the waist measurement, especially for the skirt, an inch less, maybe even 2, but I think 2 is too much, so let's stick to just 1 inch for now. I then drew straight lines, dropping from the darts to the hem. I wanted the skirt to be just below the knee, so I lengthened it a bit on the pattern. Then I cut out the pattern pieces and cut through those lines till the dart point. I then closed the darts and glued them together. This opened up the skirt to more fullness, and I also love that I won't have to stitch any darts. I measured the waistband from the skirt's waist and then cut it out. I don't like the straight waistbands that don't sit well on the waist, although they have their time and place, I guess. Also, sometimes I forget about the details that are required when making a garment to make it functional and complete, like waistbands and zippers. Most of the time I'm always in a hurry to finish and see how it looks like. For example, in this case, I forgot to add extra seam allowance at the side for the zipper because maybe I thought it would magically just appear on my body. I did have normal seam allowance though, so it had to make do. I also did not add seam allowance on the patterns, but instead while cutting. So I cut while adding seam allowance. I find that it's faster and, I don't know, easier. I was always curious as to how the A-line skirt from the metric pattern cutting book would look like, whether it would have a lot of flare or not, but based on the pattern I knew it wouldn't be like a full circle skirt, but I wasn't sure if it would be more like a half circle skirt. But after finishing it, it was much less fullness than a half circle skirt, which I really liked. This time while cutting, I first traced the pattern onto the fabric with chalk and then cut out. I saw the YouTuber Bernadette Banner do this while cutting and thought I'd try it myself. At least I didn't have to pin the fabric, except when cutting the waistbands, which were tiny. So yeah, I had to pin them so they don't move around, but the big ones I just drew and then cut. I cut 4 of them, so 2 of each, 2 for the front and 2 for the back, so that one would be a facing for the other. I cut out the interfacing without seam allowance. Should the interfacing be cut with seam allowance as well? I wasn't sure, so I didn't add, but I think I will next time since it didn't stick properly and kept moving while I worked on the waistband. I then joined the waistband pieces together to form 2 separate ones and then joined them together to complete it as one. I also top stitched to help it lay back. I joined the waistband to the skirt by first pinning, then stitching. I first ironed it open since it was a hidden zip, and that helps when stitching it, so the thread passes really close. I had also moved the iron to my sewing space because it was annoying having to keep moving the iron. I however returned it later. Pin and stitch the zip. Then I hemmed the hem by folding it twice. I really loved how it turned out. I, however, wasn't sure if that was the right length for me. Below the knee, I don't know if that was flattering. I think it depends maybe how I style it. I felt like it was one of those lengths that are in between, and you should either make it shorter or longer. But I'll decide with time if I indeed like this length. But this pattern overall is verified in my books. I'll definitely be using it again.